Hello and welcome everyone to this new Rook School series. And who out there has had a long, tough chess game where you're trying to defend, you're down a pawn, and the material goes all the way down to a rook versus a rook and a pawn, and you're defending, and it should be a draw. And it's a really long game, and then you mess up the rook ending and end up taking a loss. So that happened to me recently. So I thought, well, it's time to brush up on rook endings. And so I decided to start this new series, Rook School. This first lesson will be basically about active versus passive rooks. So you always want to try and have active rooks when you can, of course, versus passive. And so what do I mean by that? Well, you want your rooks to be on the offensive, attacking, instead of passive and defending. So I'll have a game here that I'm going to go over. It features Capablanca, the third world chess champion, versus this H. Forsberg. So this is played in 1941, and it's probably Capablanca's, one of his last games that he played. It looks like it was at the Manhattan Chess Club in New York. So let's take a look at this. And I picked Capablanca. Let me run up a review here and see what the computer says. So Capablanca played at 86.7% accuracy versus 78.5% by his opponent. But Capablanca had 3 brilliant moves and 2 great moves. And then there were some inaccuracies on both sides. Of course, his opponent had more mistakes, 5 mistakes versus Capablanca's 1. And then they each had 1 miss. All right, so getting on with the game. Capablanca, let's see here, turn on the analysis. He begins with e3, an interesting choice. Maybe he felt like just playing something different, taking his opponent out of opening book, into something that they're not used to playing. So we have g6 here. So this is called the Vent, if I pronounce this correctly, Vent Kruge's opening, something to that effect. And now we have d4 being played, which will block this bishop that's about to be developed here. And so the game continues with both sides developing. Capablanca brings his knight out, helps control these central dark squares that the bishop is aiming at. So now we have d5 taking an equal share in the center here, and now c4. So now the game is turned into it's transposed into a modern defense. So here it's kind of like, I don't know, I guess similar to the Queen's Gambit setup where the C and D pawns are played, and then you have this D4 pawn here. But in this instance, if the pawn is captured, the bishop can just capture immediately here and develop. So the opponent responds with e6 here. And the one thing about this move is that it blocks in this bishop. So now we have this bad bishop blocked in by its own pawns. All right, so moving on here. The knights are developed. The bishops, black castles here, as does white. And now, because this bishop is kind of trapped in, he decides to bring it out this way. And so we have a capture in the center here. So the less valuable the less valuable pawn off to the side here, the C pawn, captures the more valuable central pawn on d5. So after a recapture, It looks like the computer actually prefers capturing with the knight there. So now we have knight to e5 here by Capablanca. And the computer says that's an inaccuracy, that b4 would have been better. But this move is still, keeping the game about even, just a hair on white's side. So continuing on here, we have c5, and let's get on to these active and passive rooks. So right now the rooks haven't done much. Both sides have castled, but these rooks are passive because they're blocked in. They're not really doing much, so they're very passive at the moment. But they will try and change that after some maneuvering here. So finally, black develops his rook to a more active post here on e8, where it is lining up on this half open file. So one way to make your rooks more active is to place them on open files or half open files like this, or you could place them behind pawns that you've pushed forward, just so it gives them more breathing room, more room to maneuver. So we have an exchange here that leads to this knight ending up on the edge of the board. So the game continues with Capablanca deciding to grab space here on the king side. And this is another way to increase the activity of your rook, pushing the pawn in front of it. So now this rook is now the rook is gaining room to maneuver as this pawn is pushed forward, and the pawn can just continue moving forward like a battering ram backed up by this rook here. So a capture in the center, a recapture, and now we have this knight trying to get back into the center and reposition, and helping protect this isolated pawn here. And now both sides have isolated queen pawns. All right, so we have the other rook that was doing nothing much in the corner developing to this open file, the open C file. So the computer says that's an inaccuracy. It prefers an immediate push of this pawn to attack the king side. But Capablanca wanted to develop this rook that was doing nothing in the corner there. So now we have a6 being played, and the computer says that's an inaccuracy. It prefers posting the knight up here on e4, but this move it kind of, I guess, keeps the white knight from possibly jumping up here in the future, and maybe it'll help push this pawn here and try and grab some space on the queen side. So continuing on, finally Capablanca plays this f5 move, attacking, giving his rook more room to move up the board. And so now we have the knight jumping in here, attacking the bishop, and it looks like that is the best move in the position. And here we have this brilliant move being played by Capablanca. So his knight's under attack, but it's protected by the rook, but this bishop that's unprotected is under attack here. So at this point, the knight, black does not want to capture this rook because the threat here after this capture is to capture here and fork the king and the rook, and this knight will back up this pawn in the capture of f7 here. So black must put his plan of attacking this, attacking and capturing this bishop, he must put that plan on hold and take care of this threat. So he captures towards the center, and now we have this move, which The computer, interestingly enough, prefers, instead of that, capturing the knight and doubling the pawns. But then after these pawns are doubled, that rook will be lining up right here on the bishop. So, I assume that's why Capablanca didn't want to do that, because the bishop would have to move, and then the rook could possibly, you know, well, let's see here. I guess he could possibly go after this a2 pawn. But anyway, yeah, if he doubles up, if he captures here, doubling the pawns, the rook would be attacking here. That would have to move, and then possibly he could capture here. But anyway, before I go off on a sideline here, the bishop moves up, and now the game gets a little tactical and kind of crazy here. So we have knight captures, and the computer says that that is a mistake. It would have been better to reposition up to here, and then possibly the knights could try and jump in down here on e4, but after that move, we have a capture. And we'll see why black did this. Things get kind of crazy now, and there's just a big exchange of pieces. Now we have this move, and the bishop is pinning this knight to the queen, and the knight is attacking here. So in the game, we have, by Capablanca, knight captures here. And the computer says that's a mistake, and now the game is even. To get ahead, there's this crazy variation here of rook captures, and then the best move would be to capture the knight, and then the game may continue like this. Bishop captures with check, the king captures, and now the knight captures this pawn, and then the king retreats away. So let's take a look at that. Once the knight goes here, the king tries to back up and get off of this line of the queen, pinning this knight to the king. So the king backs up here. The rook moves over here, grabbing control of this open file. And we see black's rook over here is very passive. At least this rook is guarding the knight, but it's passive as well. And now there's a threat of the knight jumping in here and forking the king and the rook. So the rook jumps up here to help cover this square. And then the game gets even more crazy. This didn't happen in the game, but this is like one line, the way that the computer recommended the game could have gone. And we just see, all kinds of craziness could have happened here. And the game, could have gone on like this, where this knight is pinned to the king and the pawn's attacking it, but the queen jumps up here with check, and then it could swing back down here and pick that pawn off. And at this point, Capablanca would have been ahead quite a bit. But this is a crazy tactical line with this move here. And that's what the computer recommended. But in the game, after knight to d7, retreating back and pinning the knight with the bishop, we have knight captures here, which the computer says is a mistake. And then the game continues with rook captures, a miss. It looks like if the knight would have captured, the game would have stayed even. So now the queen retreats back here to line up on the rook here, to line up with the rook on this pawn here, creating a battery. And another way to make your rooks active are to have them work in tandem, work together. Here we see these rooks are backing each other up, or like the queen and the rook here, you could place your rooks, stack them up, and make a battery that leads into your opponent's position. So now, if the rook would capture, the queen could capture this pawn and fork the rook and the king. So that's why the rook will not try and capture here. Instead, we have f5 blocking the path of the rook and queen here. And that's the best move in the position. So now we have the rook, which is kind of, this pawn basically limited the range of the rook on this f file. So Capablanca tries to move his rook over here to the d file to make it more active, and line up, not only protect the knight, but line up on the queen and this knight as well. So now we have rook to e4, a mistake. It looks like knight to c5 would have been better, but even at that point, even with knight to e5, white is ahead. I guess we could take a look at that, because that knight to e5 move doesn't even, or sorry, knight to c5. Why am I saying e5? So knight to c5, even that doesn't look so great. Let's see, because don't you have, okay, I guess you can't move over here with the check and attack the queen with a discovered attack, because the queen could pick that off. But I don't know, then you might have another attack here pinning the rook to the queen if that happened. So it looks like capturing this pawn is the second. Well, they're tied. White at this point would either capture that pawn, and then if the queen would capture, you could just capture the knight here, or knight, let's see, or excuse me, queen to f3, moving up here, and I guess protecting the knight, because at this point we have two pieces piling up on that knight. So it looks like queen to f3 is what the computer recommends, but even then white is ahead. All right, back to the game action. So where were we? The Capablanca moves his rook to the d file, trying to make it more active. So now he has these two actively placed rooks on central, the c file is almost a central file. Normally the D and E files would be the central files, but since this rook is trying to control this one, we have the D and C files under control by white's rooks. So now we have rook to E4, the mistake, and it looks like, what did the computer want? That knight to C5 move there. And then Capablanca has a miss. It looks like queen to G3 lining up on this pawn would have been better. But we see what Capablanca is doing here. He moves his bishop to C3, lining up on this defender of the black king. So if he knocks that out, the king will be a lot weaker. If black captures, well, then I guess he could capture here and double his rooks up. So now we have black finally taking his passive rook that was stuck in the corner there for the whole game, and he finally moves it here to the open C file, where he can help fight for at least control of this C file and possibly exchange off some material. So Capablanca captures. We have king. The king doesn't capture. So it looks like first he captures here, and it says that's a mistake. So let's see here. It looks like just capturing would have been better, to just go ahead and capture the bishop instead of trading off down here. because now after this capture and this, the rook on the c file has control here, and it's not blocked in anymore by its own knight. So now we have a great move, the rook jumping up to the 7th rank. So this is another theme. I plan to do multiple lessons in this series, this Rook School series. I have a game, well, this game, and then afterwards, I'll do 2 little positions, or actually it's the same position, but I'll do it from white side and then black side and see how it plays out. But that's what I plan to do. Maybe a game that demonstrates different rook maneuvers, and then some kind of position to help you learn something to practice on, which I'll have after this game. So we have the rook jumping up here to the 7th rank, and that's a very important theme of trying to get your rooks on the 7th rank. Now, the reason behind that is usually there's a lot of pawns up there, and you might be able to attack the pawns. But here, all of black's pawns, well, most of them are on the 6th rank already. But here, you're pinning the knight to the king here. So, this was a great move, pinning the knight, putting pressure on the knight and the king at the same time. So the king moves out of that pin, moves away so the knight is no longer pinned. But the computer says that that is an inaccuracy, that it likes rook to e6 better, which would help control this 6th rank here, or black's 3rd rank, and help protect these pawns. So now we have the queen maneuvering here to d2. And from this position, the queen could, well, one, it covers this e1 square, so the rook isn't checking. The king could just move up anyway. But from here, the queen could swing over and check the king and start harassing the king, maybe go after this pawn here. So black responds with this to protect the pawn, and also to create a battery here, to renew the possibility of being able to check. So now the computer says that's a mistake, and at this point, this is a pretty big mistake, because now it's +5 in Capablanca's favor, 5 1/4. So it looks like f4 would have been better. F4. So that's pretty interesting. But, that's what the computer likes. Looks like f4, maybe the knight could just pick that off. I don't know. I mean, I guess, do you want to take a look at it? It's the last big mistake, so I guess we could take a look at this f4 move. And now here it's saying that's the 3rd best move. So what happens when we put it in there? Okay, now it's saying it's the best. And it looks like queen to c3 would be the best move now. So queen to c3. Oh, and that's pretty dangerous. Queen to c3 would be a great move, because it has a threat of jumping up here to h8, attacking the king, and once the king moves, the queen could be picked off. So black is just in trouble here. And at this point, it looks like queen to h4, threatening a checkmate in 1. Here on e1 is the best move. And now it looks like just blocking like this with g3 would be best. And instead of breaking this up and exposing the king more, where the queen could jump over here and check, at some point, I guess that would be possible. He could do it then because the knight is covering that. All right. So before I dive into something crazy, let's get on with this. So queen to e8 is played, and that is the final mistake here. And then the game continues with the knight forking the queen and the rook. And it looks like, this knight can just pick that off anyway. So let's see why this is a brilliant move. In the game, it continued with rook to e1. But let's take a look at why this move would be bad. And the reason is that leads to a mate in 2 with queen to h6 here, check. And the only place to go would be here, and then that would lead to a mate. So that is why after this brilliant knight to f6 move, the knight cannot capture here on f6. So we have this, check, and black, who is in trouble, is desperately trying to blunt this attack by Capablanca. So rook to e1 check, the king moves up, and now we have check here. So, exchanging off material. Let's take a look what the computer says would have been best here. Now, well, either way, either queen or rook to e2. But either way, you're going to exchange off material. So in the game, we had the rook to e2 check, the queen captures, and a capture. And now black just captures the knight. And so after the dust has settled, it looks like we have a rook versus a knight here. And it's Capablanca's turn, so he attacks, making sure that his rook is very active. He attacks the knight, and he's also attacking the b pawn, and if the knight moves, he'll attack the g pawn. So in the game, we have this knight move, and what does Capablanca do here? Does he just pick off the pawn? No, that would be a mistake, because if he picks off this pawn, well, then the knight could jump in here to f4 and fork the king and the rook. So the rook attacks the knight, forcing the knight to move away, and it looks like better would have been to check the king. But at this point, white is pretty much winning. So he chases the knight a little bit more. Excuse me. Let me go back here. So after this move, Capablanca's opponent resigned on move 33 because the knight's under attack. The rook is going to start eating pawns up here. The king is trapped behind this rook. And so now the game could have continued like this, knight attacking the pawn. Now the computer said that this is probably what could have happened, how the game may have continued. But it looks like a better move would have been maybe knight to c3 with an immediate check. But first I'll look at this b4 move, attacking the pawn. Well, then the game may have continued with the pawn counterattacking the knight. And now the king moving up, attacking the rook. But the rook just moves over, picking off a pawn. And now we have the knight attacking this a pawn. And that is ignored as the rook just picks off more material. And so the king moving over, So the game could have gone on like this. Let's see. And that's how the computer says that the game could possibly have played out. Um, let's see here. Another possibility, if we go back to where the game ended, is knight to b4. Or did we already look at that? Maybe it's b4, a3. I'll play it out. This might be exactly what we just had. Yeah, it looks like it is. All right, but anyway, these pawns over here are gonna be a problem in the end game. This is how the game could have played out. After the last move in the game, one other possibility is knight to c3 with check. The king would move up here towards these pawns. Black could pick off this a pawn. The rook starts picking off pawns. But now we have this h pawn, a runaway h pawn moving up the board. And the pawn just keeps on going. And so the king is ready to pick this off. Then there'll be two pawns marching up, and then the rook could swing over and take care of anything going on over here. And it would have been a win for Capablanca. All right, well, the one thing that I want to go over before I end the video is this position here. So, another topic in active versus passive rooks is, what to do. And this is similar to a position I had in my Quest for 2000 series where I play different games on chess.com. And I had a long, like 122 move game. And it came down to a similar position where I was defending and white, or I forget what color I was. I think I had the white pieces. So, but anyway, I just had a king and a rook. My opponent had a rook and a pawn, and it should have been a draw, but I was rusty and hadn't studied, the proper way to defend in a long time, and ended up losing. So this is an example. So in this position, it is, let's see, white's turn to move. So the best move here for white is king to c6. So once this is played, this is a good demonstration on how to try and move in for a win here as white. And then we'll show how to defend from black side. All right, so the king moves up, and it looks like there's two options. So right now, white is threatening a checkmate here with rook to h8. So we see how white's rook is active, getting ready to attack. It's controlling all of this 7th rank. It's controlling the h-file. And this rook here, it's not as active. It's a little passive here, blocked by this pawn. It's attacking the pawn, but the pawn's protected, and the rook is kind of limited. And now the rook is about to become very passive with this move right here. Rook to g8, defending against this checkmate. The only other possibility would have been for the king to run over here towards the corner, and we'll take a look at that as well. But first, blocking here. So now the rook is very passive, just playing defense, protecting the king, not even attacking the pawn anymore. And white jumps over to the other side of the board, remaining active and threatening to jump up here now to a8, attacking, threatening a mate here. So this is forced. The king has to move over here to avoid this checkmate on a8, but the rook's under attack. And now you want to be careful. You do not want to do this move here because then you have rook to c8, and the game is looking like a draw here because, let's see, the best recommended move is to go here, but then the rook can just swing back over to h8. But if you try and do this, bring the pawn up, well, then you have rook captures. And then what? You go here, and now you either move this or just capture right away. And then it would just be a draw. All right, so let me get back to where we were. So back to the beginning. The king has just the very beginning. White's turn. They move up here. And then we have the threat of mate. So the rook moves up here to stop a mate threat on h8. The rook swings to the other side, now threatening mate on a8 over here. So the king moves over to attack this rook. And remember, you do not want to go here in front of your king, but you want to check here. So now this gives black two different options. So you either go in the corner or you go here to c8. But if you go here, then there's this d7 move, and now it's leading to a mate in 8 moves. So the only thing the king can do is go here. Well, then you have this right here. Check. The king has to move. And then you can just pick this rook off over here. So, an easy win. All right, so back to this position. So we just saw that the king does not want to go to c8 or the pawn will move up with check and cause all kinds of problems. So the king is forced to go into the corner here. But now the king is just trapped in this corner. So white could back up all the way here to b1. And now the king is just trapped on the edge here. So the game may continue with rook to c8 check. King jumping up here attacking the rook. The rook moves to get behind the pawn. So that's something else I'll talk about in these different rook school lessons, is to put your rook behind the passed pawns, whether they're yours or your opponent's. So the king moves up to give room for his pawn to keep going. And the game may continue like this, moving in behind the pawn. The pawn comes forward. And then what does black do? Either move the king or the rook. And now, this is another position that I'll talk about, or a theme, basically called building a bridge. So you can move the rook up and create a defensive barrier for your king. And you'll see how it works here. This is called the Lucena position when you try and do this, I believe. So the king, moves. Now we have white trying to get out of the way of his pawn. So black has to do something immediately. So he checks. The king moves here. Check again. The king moves over. Check. Now the king comes back to the center. Check. And we see why the rook moved up here. Now you can block. And white would just be winning, because if the rook captured and king captures, black would not be able to get over to this pawn before it promoted. So let's see here. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. All right. I want to see what this move is. Oh, okay, that's the move I told you not to do because it leads to this. And then it'll end up, most likely a draw here with that. Then they could move away over to h8 and prevent white from making progress. All right. Well, let's see. Should I show you more of that? I'll get into this stuff more in future videos. I better move along here after that game. I'll try and speed this video up. So if we go all the way back to the beginning, after king to c6, we saw there were two options. And we took a look at this move, blocking the threat of mate. So if that's not played, the only other option is to move the king over. Well, now we have an attack, forcing the king to the edge here. And then the king moves up to help escort this pawn. And black drops back here to get behind the pawn. The pawn pushes forward, and then we have an attack. So the king moves down here, check. King moves, check. But you see what's happening here. The pawn is ready to promote, and it'll be protected by the rook. And the only thing that black has is to just keep checking. And he'll run out of checks here shortly. If he goes after the pawn, well, the pawn can just promote and he would be forced to capture, and then the rook would recapture and white would be winning. All right, so now I'll take a look at the same position, but it's black's turn to move here. So when it was white's turn, he just jumped up here to king to c6 and threatened this mate. So with black's turn to move, what should black be doing here to defend? Well, he wants to make sure he has a more active rook instead of playing too passively. So we saw that if he plays this move, rook to g8, and just plays passively, well, now the evaluation jumped in white's favor. So it looks like the best move is that king to c6 move. So you jump up here, you're cutting off the king, getting ready to possibly move your rook over and threaten a mate over here. And if the rook moves, you can move over here to the other side and threaten a checkmate up here on a8, which we just looked at earlier. And once again, excuse me, if I go back, instead of that move, we don't want to do this d7 move because now we see the evaluation dropped and it's a draw after king to d8 here, stopping the progress of the pawn. And you could have something like this, because if you don't protect the king, the rook could just move over here, check the king, and the king would have to move away, and then the pawn could be captured. Now, I guess that could not happen if the rook is still there. All right. So king to g8. Anyway, they could just maneuver back and forth, and it would be a draw with this king blocking the progress of the pawn. So now, let's see. Mm, let me take a look here. Okay, so back to the beginning. Um, we saw that you do not want to be passive with rook to g8 because of this. King moves up. The rook just stays up there to help protect the king and prevent a checkmate. The rook moves to the other side. Then the king attacks. And we have this familiar theme that we looked at earlier. The rook trapping the king on the edge. And then the king and pawn will just move up the board, and it'll be kind of what we looked at earlier. Moving your rook up to help protect and block attacks from behind when this rook moves down and then goes behind the pawn. Okay, so the final thing to take a look at here, what should black do in this position? Well, it looks like the best move is rook to g1, dropping all the way back and getting ready to just attack this king. So if the pawn moves up like this with check, well, then the king can just jump in front of it. And then if white tries to move up here, we just have checks. And if the king moves too far away from the pawn, it'll just be picked off. So the king has to protect that pawn. Anytime he moves away, you just check him. If he gets too far away, you just attack the pawn again. So rook to g1. What does it recommend here? What about that? Check. Well, then the king just jumps here in front of the pawn. If we have this, the king just steps straight back. If the king tries to move up here, well, then we can just check him. It looks like kind of the same thing. The king would just have to move around. We just check him. And if he gets too far away, we just pick off the pawn. All right, well, I won't go into too much more today. That was the first lesson, so hopefully I'll cover many different topics related to rooks in this new Rook School series. I'd like to talk about the Philidor position, the Lucena position, how pawns, rooks belong behind passed pawns. Make sure the rooks are active instead of passive. I'll cover all of this, and we'll slowly dig deeper and go more in depth into all these different rook positions. So I hope you enjoyed this first video on this Rook School series. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and feel free to leave comments or suggestions or any requests for different chess topics you would like to see in the future. Well, thank you all for watching, and have a super chess day.